Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us on your busy Tuesday to talk about a really incredibly important topic that I think is all on our minds, right? Communicating public health during a very polarizing era and times in the United States and even across the world. I'm Caitlin Jetelina, your local epidemiologist. You probably already knew that, though. We have a newsletter that translates public health science for everyday use. And this is our first webinar. And so far, the tech is going well. So we'll see how this goes. But I am ecstatic to be joined by Mr. Kyle McGrowan. Kyle is the former chief of staff at CDC under the first Trump administration. Before that, the director of external affairs at U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And before that, has worked a lot with a number of Congress men and women over at the Hill. He right now is the founding partner of Ascendant Strategic Partners, which basically provides guidance for health policy. I met Kyle like a year or two ago. He stumbled upon my newsletter and is now a subscriber. So he is one of us, the Wiley community, and he reached out to meet. But selfishly, I have learned more from him than I think he has learned from me.
Oh, no, that's not fair.
Particularly talking about public health to a broad audience, right? While not alienating people from different value systems or even different worldviews. So let's get into it. A few housekeeping things to start us off. One, you'll see that the chat is turned off, or I hope you see that the chat is turned off if I did it right. And that's because we just didn't want trolls in here. That doesn't mean though I don't want, and I'm gonna try to have a two-way conversation. So one way we're going to be doing that is please submit your questions and even reactions to the Q&A. We'll try to get to as many as possible after this conversation with Kyle and I. And hopefully, Kyle, you're ready to be on your toes with some of these questions.
Yeah, sure. I'm excited about it.
And then, this is also the first live event, so I'd love to hear your feedback afterwards. Constructive feedback, please. And you can email yourlocalepidemiologist@gmail.com. And then finally, this is recorded, and the recording is going to be available to you and all paid Wiley subscribers afterwards. So, okay, I think that's it. Let's get into it. Okay, before we get into it, I think one of the most important lessons I've learned over the past 5 years is to always know your audience. And so in this light, I want to do a quick poll to understand who you are, and particularly why you're here. So if I did this right, again, I have 2 poll questions for you. Let's launch this first one. And this first one is, where's your primary place of employment? Or if you want to answer it, a lot of us have multiple jobs. What is most applicable to this conversation? Oh, I love statistics. This is great. All right, a few more seconds. People are still submitting their answers.
This is great.
Okay.
I'm glad that I am your first guinea pig here. I'm enjoying it.
You're very patient. Okay, 5 more seconds. You guys are still submitting. Don't think too hard about it. Okay. Primary place of employment. Oh, I can share results too. Majority
Oh, wow.
local and state public health departments represent. Very few from federal. I'm kind of surprised about that. Lots of academia, lots of nonprofit, and lots from the retirement community. So love to see it. Okay, next question, and this is the last, I promise. Okay, recognizing we are all feeling a range of emotions, which one best captures how you're feeling right now in today's polarized health landscape? The most forward, most dominant feeling you have right now?
I have so many though.
I know. I made people pick one. So maybe just this hour.
Right this second.
Right this second. Oh, this isn't even close.
Uh,
Okay. A few more seconds. 40 of you are holding out on us. Okay. Share results. I don't know if anyone's going to be too surprised about this. 65% of the audience is concerned that the state of things worries me deeply. We have after that some frustrated, some angry, but also some hopeful and some empowered as well. So there is a range of emotions here. So, Kyle, you see where people are coming from.
yeah.
Um, with this new administration, I think the biggest thing I guess I'm feeling is that public health is walking into the unknown, right? There's kind of questions around mission and goals, and there's talks of rearranging and slashing. And a lot of the traditional public health successes that we have built our careers around, and even the value of our field, even maybe, are being put into question. And so, like you said, you saw a lot of people are concerned, scared, nervous, don't know what to do. What is your advice into walking into this new administration?
Yeah, well, I'll be honest. All of those confused, angry, concerned, hope, even hopeful. I've had a mix of all of those emotions over the past, even 6 months, actually, even not just over the past weeks since the election results. I will say I'm a firm believer, and you can only control your little piece of the universe. And worrying about things that are outside of your control do, does absolutely nothing. And so while it's perfectly fine to be angry, it's perfectly fine to be confused or concerned, I look at this as an opportunity for us all to get better. An opportunity for us to say, now is the time for us to start doing things a little differently so that we can take more ownership in how we communicate individually and outward. There's nothing we can do to change the outcome of elections or people that are in positions of power, but what we can change and what we can do is focus on how we personally communicate with people directly in front of us and across from us, our peers, our neighbors, our friends, people that we work with. And so I would say let's focus on what we can control, and that is communicating the great work individually of public health.
Okay, great advice. Now let's start getting into the weeds of what
Yeah.
that would look like, right? So you've worked with me, also with other public health programs, to really think strategically around positioning public health in this, again, polarized era, particularly with programs that don't necessarily always have bipartisan support, say like firearms.
Mhm.
So, I think this is challenging, right? Because public health, we start getting this tug of war, it feels like, at least, between individualism and population community strategies. So what do we do? Like, what do you tell programs how we effectively communicate public health to audiences that fundamentally sometimes just oppose views on science or government or priorities?
We work with a number of private companies, governments, individuals in communicating public health and public health science. And the first thing that I always start with is setting aside the message and say, we're not talking about the message yet. We're going to focus on who is our audience. And that who is our audience is always a matrix of people that already are supportive, and we're trying to give more tools and the ability to spread that message. There are third-party validators, or there are people that vehemently oppose our message sometimes. And building that matrix out and understanding who your audience is super important to tailor the message. And as an example on that, it works both ways, right? And so you mentioned firearms. When I was at the CDC in, I think this was in the 2018 or 2019 date range, Congress provided the CDC just a little bit of money to do gun research. Well, because of the Dickey Amendment and years of Republicans wanting to not have agencies like the CDC do anything around firearm research because they feel like it's going to lead to restrictions on firearms. There was a huge wall in front of us of not allowing the CDC to use this money. And so the first thing we did was not put our head in the sand and not build up a wall or be defensive. We talked about who we have to sell this message to, who we had to approach, and what their concerns were. And when we found out really quickly that all we have to say is, hey, the research we're doing is around veteran suicide, safe storage so children don't get access to handguns that are being stored improperly, and research on and data points on the actual caliber and the types of weapons that are being used in both homicides and accidents, data collection across the board. All it was data collection. It was a pretty smooth and easy road from there because they realized that all we were doing was collecting data, and we shouldn't ever be scared of data. And that money is still flowing into the CDC today. I don't know if it's going to continue. Hopefully it does, but that's how we sold that. And it started with who needs the right message and what do they care about most. And we did the same thing as an example with the Ending HIV Epidemic Initiative, which was pretty much the only healthcare related bipartisan initiative that passed in the previous Trump administration. And we had Donald Trump's administration, Nancy Pelosi, and Mitch McConnell to all buy into the idea that we could end HIV, new cases of HIV in the United States in the next decade. And that money is still coming and that initiative is still going. And it started with two messages that lead to the same path. One, the heartstrings of now is the time to do this with Democrats and our friends on the left. And here's how much money and return on investment we'll get and the savings we'll get for every single transmission that we prevent from happening. And it was a dollars and cents on one side and it was a heartstrings on the other, but it was the same message. And those two messages led us down a path where we now have the Ending HIV Epidemic Initiative still up and going. It needs more help, it needs more money, it needs more time, but we got there by delivering the right message to the right people.
Okay, good. So audience matters. Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Framing also matters, right? What's going to resonate with that audience? So most of the people in the audience are local and public health departments.
Yep.
When you're thinking about them talking to their community and say there is, a message about fluoride or vaccines or something that needs to come out, how that should they be, what are tips and tools they can use when
Yeah.
talking to that audience?
Yeah, so this gets to the crux of the problem, or what we're here to talk about, I think, and communicating and talking and not just communicating, but being able to deliver a message with enough weight and enough thoughtfulness that it resonates and gets someone to do something different is difficult. It takes practice. There are very few people that are just born with the natural talent to communicate in that way. There are a handful, but most individuals, including myself, get better at it with practice. And I mean, I equate it to, a professional baseball player doesn't just come out of the womb knowing how to throw, a curveball. It takes years and years of practice, and communicating is the exact same thing. And communicating individually to an individual sitting across from you is actually more difficult at times than standing at a podium talking to the world, because you're trying to deliver a message to a single person that has so many different things that's going through their brain that to deliver the right message, you have to truly get inside their mind and understand what their concerns and what their questions are. And I think recently read a great book by Adam Grant called Think Again, and he gets into the mind of what makes people change the way they think. And it really starts with what he calls confident humility. Everyone on this webinar is capable from a knowledge base of delivering why vaccines are good or why fluoride is good for everyone in the world to have, right? They have that knowledge base. What we have to work on is delivering it with confident humility and not arrogance. I love the CDC. I love public health. I love everyone that's in this profession. I came to the CDC with a knowledge of public health and left with a passion. But as a whole, public health tends to deliver a message with arrogance versus confident humility. And I did this example to a friend of mine just a couple weeks ago. I said, tell me, I am a new father. I have a 6-month-old child. Tell me why I should get my child vaccinated. And he gave me a wonderful 90-second elevator speech. That was great. But then I said, well, now I have 8 questions, when in reality, at the beginning, I only had one. You mentioned vaccine safety, and you mentioned all of the work that's done to report vaccine cases of harm. Well, what does that mean? Like, what? I don't understand what that means. Explain that to me. When you talk about how like the flu vaccines developed, now I have a thousand more questions based on that. All you had to ask me was what my concern was. I had one question. And because you had so much information, wonderful information, you gave me too much at one time and made me think of other questions instead of making me feel better. All you had to do was start with, before we get into that, what's your biggest concern? I use that every single day. What's your biggest concern with this problem? And it is a floodgate that opens because you're giving the individual that you're talking to the ability to just tell you what's on their heart. And then that's where you pick, here's the message out of my tool belt that I've already prepared to deliver because they wanted this specific question. And that takes time to be able to ask that question with empathy. And I will tell you this, if you ask someone what their concerns are and you don't care, they will see through it night, just like it's black and white. You actually have to care when you ask the question, what are your concerns? You have to want to help that individual down the path. And if you don't genuinely want to help, it shines through bright as day. So having empathy and genuinely caring are things that can't really be taught. You have to practice. And once you practice that and it starts clicking, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's easier.
Yeah, it comes down to what I saw is that listening is different than hearing, right?
100.
And that always resonated with me. Even when I comment on like social media or something, I'm like, I'm genuinely interested in this question. Like truly, I'm
Mhm.
trying to understand. And
Right.
what I have found is that 99% of the time, people are like, holy shit, Caitlin's like, this person's willing to listen rather than like throw facts um or I don't know, like mean comments back. And that doesn't get at it. So yeah,
Yeah, I
okay.
mean,
So
when you're doing that, it's like a level of arrogance, and they immediately people start building up a brick wall, and it's like, got this all over again. Some smart person telling me what I should do and what I should know. When I just have some simple questions I want someone to ask without doing it in a professorial way or an arrogant way.
and they're
Um,
usually really good questions. And
yes,
sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this is the right answer, Kyle. Maybe you can tell me, but like sometimes I'm like, I don't know, but I'm gonna go find the answer for you and I'll be back.
right,
Because I think that also lends to humility because we don't know everything.
right.
Um,
I don't know is never the wrong answer.
okay.
And it's not. And again, if you are trying to build trust with someone, admitting where you don't know, and I know as a profession, people that have gone to medical school or got a master's in public health and especially have gone to wonderful, Ivy League schools, you're not taught to be humble. You're not taught to say, you're taught to have all the answers. You're taught to make sure that you have every I dotted and every T crossed. But that's not communicating though. That's not building up trust and understanding what's in someone's heart. And so you kind of have to take down. My wife's an attorney, and she talks about the very first thing they teach you in law school is how not to think, and that we have to reverse engineer that. We have to put humility back into our hearts. We have to put being thoughtful and genuine back into our heart instead of just saying, I'm a robot and I'm here to get every fact perfectly correct. And once you say, I don't know, but I'm going to go find it for you, that means you're a real person that cares. And I know even me, I hate saying I don't know, but I don't know is never the wrong answer.
Yeah, okay. Good. Three most important words I learned during the pandemic, at least.
Yeah.
Um, you also, when we were chatting a few weeks ago about the idea of this webinar, you also gave really good advice to me in that part of understanding where someone comes from, you need to go read things that you don't agree with and that
Yeah.
may get your blood boiling. And I've been trying to do that. I'll be honest, it's really effing hard. But any other like advice with that, or is that basically the crux of it?
Yeah, I mean, it makes you sharper, right? I mean, we never, you should never reach a point in your life where you're not learning something new every day. And learning something new doesn't mean learning what you already know that you agree with. I'll be honest, I read, like, for example, Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. Tough to get through, really tough.
Yes.
Um, there were sections that were horrible. Um, but it's super important to read through, and I should preface why. I think the idea of taking and telling people in public health, specifically at the CDC, that they can't recommend childhood vaccines is terrible. There have been a number of wonderful tools in the public health toolbox, but nothing more important than childhood vaccines. It has saved more lives, and it has increased productivity across this world more than any single innovation. And so telling public health that they can't, public health individuals, they can't talk about or recommend childhood vaccines is not a good idea. And so, but reading through that and seeing what the authors of the Project 2025 playbook had, it allows you to be sharper in how you communicate the other side of the coin of what childhood vaccinations are good for. It helps to understand their point of view of where they're coming from. And while I like to play chess, I'm not super great at it, but you have to think three or four heads, moves ahead. And it's hard to do that if you don't understand where they're coming from.
Yeah,
And so I encourage everybody to read all sorts of things and read things that you disagree with.
it's hard. It's hard, I'll
Yes.
be honest.
I mix in science fiction in there. I have to read a little bit and then pick up another book, read a chapter and jump back and forth.
Or some Adam Grant, which is a little more
Yeah.
inspiring too. Yeah. Awesome. The other thing you told me about a good framing is innovation.
Yep.
That us in public health the perception of public health is that we're stuck in the 1900s.
Yep.
And that's just not the case. And we need to talk more about that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there is I cannot tell you how many times when I was at the CDC that people would say this is just the entire profession of public health is nothing but an academic exercise to say this event happened in the past and here's why it happened. There is nothing, and I'm saying this, I disagree with this, but people have told me this, and there's no action that's on the front end.
Forward thinking.
And my response to that is, well, the actions have prevented the outbreaks that you're looking for. When public health works, those things that you're talking about don't happen. You only see public health or a breakdown in public health when we have an outbreak of measles, when we have a resurgence of polio. you only see those things when public health starts to break down. And it's hard to show and point to successes. And I think the best way to talk about that is to talk about how public health is not it's not an academic thought process. It's an innovative way to stay ahead of the next outbreak. And I hate using buzzwords, but I'll use the buzzword innovation, that because there's nothing we can do today to prevent the next outbreak, in my opinion, unless we innovate our way out of the problem. The current status and the current way that we approach things can slow things down, but we have to innovate to stay ahead of the next thing. And that's actually something that really resonates with conservatives and Republicans, because that is applying a private sector business mindset to something that they believe is an academic practice. And so I would encourage, when you're talking to Republicans, conservatives, people that may lean that way, to talk
Also
about,
liberals. We like
well,
innovation.
everyone, but it resonates with conservatives because that's their default, for the most part, way of thinking about things, right? Is we need innovations. Well, we have to encourage innovation, and innovation takes infrastructure and money to be able to innovate properly. And so, yeah, innovation is a wonderful buzzword to use for sure.
And even, I mean, I think about public health. I mean, innovation also doesn't have to be like super sexy. My wastewater friends are going to get mad at me by saying this, but like wastewater is not a sexy thing, like collecting poop, but like the innovation is the reach, it is the
Yep.
unbiased surveillance, it is, I mean, it is the stream underneath all of our streets. And so like if it, I think that's important too, is that it's not just the next gadget, it's also thinking about these things. I mean, another innovation right now is data, right? Data, data modernization. My wastewater friends are texting me angry that wastewater is not sexy, but like, but it's also data, right? So data and the infrastructure for data is incredibly innovative to get all those pipelines in this decentralized system flowing to one place or another is a really hard thing to do. And I think you already mentioned that data is also kind of a sexy buzzword in this polarizing world as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I know the people on the call here, and people in public health will believe me when I say this, but when we in the early days, so the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks of COVID at the CDC, our innovation and our data was a team that stayed up overnight putting up a slide deck so that we could be ready for 7 a.m. Presentation of case counts. And that wasn't because the CDC is terrible. They're not. That was because of the infrastructure that was in place at the county and local level, that we were having to get case counts by faxes and phone calls and emails. And we cannot live and operate in a world in 2020 where the innovation and the way that we are gathering data is through 1980s fax machines. And so when we talk about innovation and we talk about data, we're talking about catching up with where the rest of the world is today. And so I'm a firm believer in, when we're talking about innovations in public health, I want the path of least resistance to the greatest impact. I want people out there designing and building the next groundbreaking thing, but oftentimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We
Yeah.
can take things and ways of collecting data off the shelf that other industries are using and apply it to public health. We in public health just have to be open-minded enough to see how these tools can be applied to what we're doing. I also know it takes money, it takes infrastructure to be able to do that, but it also takes communicating why those are important to be able to really make an impact.
And partnership, right?
That's right. That's right.
Um, okay, we have a lot of questions coming in, but
Let's do
before we
it.
do, I just want to highlight another kind of tool in my tool belt I have learned over the past 4 years. I'm curious about your reaction, Kyle. But there's framing is important, the buzzwords are important, listening is important, but I think also something that I've learned is your actual words you use matter,
Yeah.
particularly to your audience. I had breakfast with Senator Cassidy. He's a Republican in Louisiana, going to be the new Help Committee chair, I think.
Mhm.
And he taught me this really great lesson of, like, for example, don't Caitlin, don't talk about pandemic preparedness. Talk about biosecurity risk, right? Like, they're the same exact things, but they resonate very differently. Another thing I've learned in my newsletter is the word misinformation is a trigger word.
Yep.
People get triggered by that word for good reason and also bad
Yep.
reason. And so what I've started doing is use the word rumor or falsehood, right? Because it comes down, I think, to your objective, especially on social media and especially writing form, is that if you want people to hear you and to
Yeah.
keep reading, you cannot come off the first sentence or two as defensive. Like, there's
Right.
just no way, or have those trigger words.
Yeah.
You will go viral, right? You can stroke emotion and you can go viral. I know how to go viral on social media, but that's not my objective, at least with my newsletter. It's to get people to for me to hear people and also for people to hear me. Are
Yeah.
there any other words that, like, come to top of your mind, or not really?
I mean, those you kind of hit
Yeah,
on the right ones. I mean, I think it gets to knowing your audience, right? I mean,
yeah,
you can say all of those words that you said to the right audience, and it won't trigger the individual, so it really comes down to having the ability to read your audience and what drives them, and it starts with asking questions.
yeah.
And so to get the parallel messages of, here are folks that have concerns, just using vaccines as an example, concerns with vaccines. Here are the words I'm going to stay away from. Here are the things I'm going to focus on. People that I already know agree with what I'm saying. Here's how I can move quicker and just say whatever I need to say. But it comes to knowing and how to separate at the front end who your audience is. I always like to say, and I will be honest, this comes from my own arrogance years ago, and still I'm learning every day on this. Is, do you want to be right, or do you want to convince someone and lead them down the path to change? Those are two completely different things. I can't tell you how many times I have walked away from conversation saying, "Well, I was right. They just didn't listen." What impact did that do? Made me feel good for 30 seconds. That individual didn't change anything. So do you want to be right, or do you want and call someone, a conspiracy theorist, and show them that they are? Or do you want to lead them down a path to actually changing the way they think? And the way we do that is confident humility.
Confident humility. We can all
Yeah.
use a dose of that.
Yeah. And
um
again, I will tell you this. Humility is like patience. It is earned. No one just has it. I don't believe. I certainly did it. I, have not always been humble in my life and career. I have, these statements I'm saying are coming from absolute life that I've lived. I can't tell you, working in a congressional office when you're in your early 20s, and every time you pick up the phone, it's someone calling to yell at you and your boss. You learn humility really quickly. And no one has ever, very few people will call their congressman to say, "You did a great job today. Thank you." Right? It's 700,000 people calling you saying, "What are you doing? I hate you. You're terrible." And so you learn really quickly how to be humble, mainly get off the phone. And so I approach this from if I just let this person talk, I get off the phone a lot quicker. And I learned over time that actually, if I let this person talk instead of trying to tell them they're wrong, or what my boss did was the right way and you were thinking about it the wrong way, if I just listened 90% of the time, they were like, "Well, that makes sense. I disagree though." I was like, "Oh, wow, we're making progress." And so this isn't something that I like just genius came up with. This is from years of getting it wrong and finally stumbling into what Adam Grant calls confident humility.
Yeah. I had the same learning experience, not with phone calls from 700,000 people, but comments
Oh
on
yeah.
social media from 700,000 people. I mean, I mean, especially if you're reading them to listen rather than hear, I think you start really, I mean, you have to have a tough skin, I'll tell you that, but it does teach you in the end. Always thankful for that. Okay. We had a lot of questions come in during registration. We also have some Q&As here. I'm going to start with two questions we got from registration because I thought they were so great. And then we'll go into Q&A, a live Q&A. So Kyle, and maybe I can start us off with this and hear your reactions. But the first question was, as a public health official for a local health jurisdiction, what are some things I should or shouldn't do to preserve the trust of people in my community? Um, I'll kind of dive in here with things that I've learned. One is to be brave.
Mhm.
It's really scary to speak up and put your neck out there, but people trust you. Local public health departments are the second most trusted source of health information, right? Not CDC, not FDA, but it's your local health department behind physicians. Why? There's three reasons. One, you're believable, you're credible. But I think most importantly, you're relatable, right? You're one of them. You get their concerns, you get the trade offs in your current environment, you have their accent, you know their lingo, right? So, my biggest thing is to lean into that. People trust humans, not trust brick walls, and to put your voice out there. Second, to build trust or maintain trust is to be honest,
Yeah.
right? I think we need to be way better at communicating uncertainty. And if you make a policy decision, you need to discuss the trade offs that you had to make. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes we made during the pandemic is we did not discuss trade-offs. So say what you know, say what you don't know, and admit when you're wrong. I have been
100.
so frustrated about the lack of people that have stepped up during the pandemic and admitted what they did wrong. For one exception is Francis Collins right now. He is like going all out, apologizing and saying what he got right, but also what got wrong. I think that builds trust.
Yeah.
Listen from a place of empathy, and then more like to build trust, try to create a two-way street. You can do this through like town halls, you can do this for Q&A, you can like set up a tip line. Just try to understand what's on the people's minds in your community rather than and lead with that rather than what's important to Dr. Caitlin Jetelina, local health person. um, I think the other big reality that I want to admit here, though, and this is what I experienced in Texas during the pandemic as an epidemiologist, is sometimes us in public health are put a muzzle on us. Like we literally can't say some things we want to say. And in this case, I think this is really where community engagement comes in, that we can equip trusted messengers, that we need to have these relationships in the community, and continue to gain buy-in from the top. Kyle, what am I missing here?
Yeah, I mean, all of that is spot on, and I 100% agree. The only thing I would really add is you can't wait until a crisis to be prepared to be a leader in messaging. It takes the best time to really hone your skills, but also build up I guess not the confidence, but build up the respect in your community that people will listen to you is now, not during a crisis. Once a crisis starts like COVID, it's over with, right? Like you either have it built in or you're behind the ball. And so now is the time to start building that goodwill. And the only thing I would add to what you said is when you speak with knowledge, be humble, say exactly what you said, be honest about what you know and what you don't know, but also don't water down your message. And what I mean by that is we we fall into, especially in public health or just leaders in general, fall into this trap sometimes where people will come to us and ask for information, will ask for quotes, will ask for thoughts on things. And sometimes the answer is, I don't really think I have a lot of value to bring to that. And I know that is super against what a lot of people, if I am given a microphone, I want to use it, right? But I would say use it to talk about the message that matters. Don't water down your message and talk about everything under the sun. Because when you do that, it waters everything else down. So I get asked all the time for quotes on, from reporters. I 5 people have emailed me while we're sitting here talking because there's something going on that I got to go check on after
No.
this. But I'm not going to say anything because it waters down my message. When I speak, I want to speak and have something to say. And so I would just encourage all of you in public health, when you speak and you give a message, and this isn't on an individual basis, this is if we're speaking to the public or speaking to the media or something like that, have something to say. And if you don't have something to say that is important or impactful or driving a public health message, don't say anything at all. And that actually, from someone like me, who, if you years ago gave me the ability to talk in a microphone, I was going to talk, and I still will. And that took years for me to say, I don't have anything to bring to this. I'm watering my message down. I'm not going to say anything. I would just encourage you, next time someone asks you to be a part of something, make sure that your message you're delivering is your message and it's a positive message and not buying into whatever they're leading you down the path to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. I was always taught in media. I mean, we're never taught in public health how to do this stuff, but during COVID, one of the great pieces of advice I got from a national reporter was, Caitlin, have 2 bullets already written down of what you
Right.
want to get across, and get those bullets in there regardless of what their question is, right?
That's right.
Because that is the message you want to get across as public health.
That's right.
There's a question, a live question that came in that I think is relevant to this conversation, and I don't know if I know the answer, but how do you practice confident humility with an administration that doesn't value that honest, I don't know?
I would push back on that and say, how do you know they don't? Right? I mean, I think there are only a handful of us on this call that have probably ever met RFK. Only a handful of us on this call have ever met the president. I'm not here to defend either one of them. I won't do that. But how do you know? And I look at it as not a wall to bang my head against, but a problem to solve. There is something in everyone's mind that makes them tick. And it is our job as not public health, but communicators to figure out how to go around that wall, go under the wall, over the wall, through it, to figure out a way to tailor a message that resonates. And so I would push back and say, our goal is to figure out a pathway to build a message that resonates. And take RFK as an example. Again, I said I wasn't going to defend him, but I'll say what I have been telling folks at the CDC. Transparency is the ultimate sunlight here, right? There are a lot of things that he has said around vaccines, as an example, that once the data is out there, we prove and show from the CDC. I think that's the only way to get to a point where we can get a message that resonates with him, is ultimate transparency. Nothing to hide. You're seeing everything under the hood. And so there's always a pathway, but some of those pathways are extremely difficult, and I will admit that.
Yeah, I think I mean, when I think about my time at Wiley, I was actually very concerned about this in the beginning. And I think it came out from public health in general, is like, when you say you don't know, does that chip away at your credibility? I always thought it would. I actually learned it does the exact opposite, in that it actually lets people know the border of what the extent of your expertise. And we actually know a shitload, right? Like, we know a lot. We don't know everything. And I think people just want honesty and to be talked to in I don't know, straightforwardness with a level of transparency, like you said. And people actually appreciate that a lot too. And I actually think that's how you build trust. Okay, another question, Kyle. This is for you. How do you get across the idea of public in public health, that community interest may override short-term interest if we are to achieve the best health for all?
Yeah. So I know we were talking about this before we jumped on, and something I'll add is so people are just in their heart selfish, and I say that I care. I love everyone in public health. I want everyone to be healthy and safe. I care more about my son and my wife and my family than I do people that I've never met. And it's not that I don't care about them, it's that I care more about my family. So it's not, there's a nuance here. And anyone that says that they're different, they're lying to themselves. And so you have to truly understand how humans work. When you're talking about individuals that they know, they care more. When you're talking about their family, they care even more. When you say this word public, that means nothing to the individual on the street. And so when we're delivering a message about the need to mask or whatever the public health message is, and that this is for the greater good, vaccinating and getting to a critical mass prevents things from spreading like measles, right? Like these are public health messages. Well, that doesn't resonate unless we can turn the focus and talk about how this will help your family. And so I would always encourage you to think about delivering a message of how this will help you, your children, your immediate family. And oh, by the way, the byproduct is it also helps the elderly neighbor that lives down the street, right? But you always want to focus on your family, your kids, because every single person wants their family and their children to be safe and healthy. They do. And so focusing on that and then saying, oh, by the way, this is what it means for the rest of society and the public. I think that's the best way to approach it. Saying this is what's going to help everyone is not a message that resonates.
Yeah, at least with one side of the aisle, I guess.
Right.
I think that, I mean, in one way that you've taught me, and I keep hearing over and over, and I need to get better at doing this, is storytelling
Yes.
too, right? And bringing that individual perspective and story forward to then drive population change is one approach to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is where again, it doesn't happen overnight. I'm reading 3 books right now. I'm reading. I'm a nerd. I'm reading a 800-page biography about Gerald Ford. Yeah, yeah. I can't believe I admitted that, but The Ordinary Man, right? And then I'm also reading the second book in a sci-fi series, the Silo sci-fi series, and then a book by my friend Caitlin Rivers, Crisis Averted. And I think reading multiple things in multiple genres across the board like that helps me think about how to deliver messages, but also to just be more thoughtful. Like you cannot read enough because you will find that you get ideas from unexpected places and how people think. Not how I personally am going to do something, but how does that person over there think differently than me? And how can I go over their wall or under their wall of that they have put up? And it just gives you more ability to be nimble when communicating.
Yeah, I agree. I wish I had time for 3 books at once, but that's fantastic. I think that there's this question that came in, and it's a hard one, because it's very personal. But basically, how do we respond with humility when we're burnt out? We have been going through this cluster roller coaster thing for the past almost 5 years. I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
Yes, it takes humility, takes patience and listening, but at a certain point, we also have targets on our backs too, and we're tired. So, any pointers there?
So I would be lying if I didn't say I left the CDC at a time that was pretty crucial, but I was burned out. I was. And so this is something that I know better than most of being burned out. And my only I think this is a very personal question because there are going to be different things that work for different people. I would suggest two things. You have to find an outlet to be able to turn your brain off, even for just minutes, preferably hours. My outlet was reading. That's why I just run through books,
I
right?
can't tell.
Right. But I mean that was my outlet. And I would just read all sorts of crazy stuff. And that was my ability to, because I could not turn my brain off from coming back to why I was burned out. The details of the every day to day that I was having to do. So that was my outlet. And also having someone in your life, for me, it was my wife and my business partner, Amanda, right? Having people in your life that get it and are willing to talk when you want to talk, because I didn't always want to talk, but sometimes I did, right? And so having people, trusted people in your life that you can just lean on, you can't do this. You can't do life in general on your own, let alone being in these types of stressful positions on your own. So I would encourage you to find an outlet to help you turn your brain off, even temporarily, and find people that you can lean on that's not going to try to preach to you about suck it up or whatever. Sometimes you just need to be pissed off and bitch and moan. And that's
Yeah.
fine. You just need to find the person that'll allow you to do that. Wake up the next morning and have at it. It's another day.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was part of this thing called Nerdy Neighborhood through the first year or two of the pandemic. And it was just a group of us SciComm people like on Slack venting, right? And working with each other and hearing each other and saying you're not going crazy kind of thing, I think helps a lot. The other thing that I didn't realize until it basically was too late is to realize when you're burning out, um,
Yes.
and to take a break. Public health, the communities are always going to need you, but they need you with a full tank. And so I would just literally unplug for like 2 weeks and go to Santa Barbara or somewhere that is just makes me my happy place. Because my God, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? And I didn't realize that fast enough during the pandemic. Now I am thinking of it as a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
Particularly with RFK Jr. and everything that's going to be out there. And um we can other people can hold the baton while you take a break and then we'll pass it to you when you get into.
Yeah, and I think that's a super important thing is to being able to recognize you're burning out before you get there. Um,
Yeah.
I remember that the oh crap moment at the CDC was early January when one of the IM at the time, that the incident manager that was running the outbreak, I turned to him after our 7 a.m. meeting and asked him, so how bad is this going to get? So prior to this, I'd worked on a measles outbreak and two Ebola outbreaks. And he looked at me with bloodshot eyes and bags under his eyes and said, "This is the one we've always worried about." And it sent me chills down my back right now saying it. And that's when I knew like things were going to get real and I needed to help not necessarily myself, but everybody that was working 20-hour days at the time, that I needed to start helping them. And so I would also encourage you to look for not necessarily you being burnt out, but others in your circle being burned out and helping them to understand, hey, it's time to take a break, or what can I do to help you? It's important to understand when you're hitting that wall yourself, but it's also equally important when you see it in others.
I love that. Yes, I agree. All right, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Um, and it has to do with misinformation. And basically, the ask is how should public health communicators respond to misinformation or rumors or falsehoods without unintentionally amplifying it? And I can take a shot here because
Yeah.
I get this question a lot. And I think it goes towards how do we build trust? One, research has now debunked that if you address a rumor, it's going to do more bad than good. That is not correct. You will not amplify more misinformation if you do it correctly. And that is the true sandwich, right? Start with the truth, address the rumor head on, and end with the truth. But I want people to start thinking about this a little differently. I think of misinformation, rumors, falsehoods, whatever you want to call it, as a tip of the iceberg. That it is but maybe 20% of the reasons why people make health decisions. 80% is beneath the surface, which is questions, concerns that they just can't get answers to. And so then misinformation fills those voids. And so I think public health really needs to focus on below the surface. It's less sexy. There's no menace with like misinformation does, but it means that we need to start anticipating concerns, answering questions from a place of empathy, being responsive to needs on the ground, and creating a two-way street. And all of that is way harder than combating a rumor that's going to be a game of whack-a-mole. And so I think my biggest takeaway on the next couple years, next decades, there's always going to be rumors and falsehoods, is to think of it as what you said in the beginning, Kyle, is what can we control? What
Yeah.
we can control is below the surface, and that's what really needs a lot of our work so we can move this iceberg and help it melt along the way. Do you have any
Yeah.
addition?
I- the only thing, and I 100% agree with that. And the only thing I would add is you have to look at misinformation or disinformation, whatever it is, as it's a constant drumbeat on that side. And so to combat that, it's a constant battle. We can't just wait until something comes up and it's like, now we got to go fight. It is a constant drumbeat of communicating to people the importance of public health. And that would be the only thing that I would, it's not a up and down. It needs to be a constant communicating and effort. And I know that's super difficult to do, but do it with leading questions, or leading with a question, and getting to know people, and it'll start clicking a lot more and become a lot easier. Yeah.
It comes back to what you also said, is that you can't just show up during emergencies, right?
That's
You
right.
you, you have to be this constant presence. And I know public health will be there, and we'll be doing that, and we're gonna go forward with this. So Kyle, thank you so
Yeah.
much for spending your time. And thank you everyone for joining. If I did all the settings correctly, this is recording. And so I will send it out to everyone who attended, and then paid subscribers on Wiley. But have a nice rest of your day and week, and happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I appreciate it.
All right, bye.
Bye.